We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Heard over on DJ's Brightside Home Theater podcast. He's going through quite the storm weather. At least he was last week. So hope everything.
Oh yeah,
is
we
okay
sent a
there.
hurricane up as well.
Hurricane, yeah.
It sucks to be you guys.
That hasn't been hitting
Welcome to
you
Florida.
in Florida as of recently. It's moved farther north. I see.
Henry took one look at Florida and said, I ain't going there, and turned and went straight up north. Let's go to some more sane people.
Well,
Yeah,
I hope everybody is safe and okay.
I hope so too. I don't know. It's one of those things where, down here we're so used to hurricanes,
Right.
and we don't take them very seriously unless they are really serious. But other places in the world and in this country, they just don't have the infrastructure there to deal with the rains and the waters and
Here on the
everything
West
else.
Coast,
So,
we would have no idea what to do.
No.
It's not typical for us whatsoever. So, yes, but unfortunately, it seems as though somewhere in the world, someone is always suffering something these days. So, I guess that's just a perpetual hope everybody's okay, and we'll leave it at that. Yeah.
right. If something, everybody be okay.
Yes.
That's what we're going for. Just okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's hot here if anybody cares.
Ah, yeah.
Take it.
Well, there's a
DJ, if you're
huge
listening
surprise.
to this. I woke up at 5:15 this morning to go cycling, and I looked at the weather, and it says it was 81 degrees, and it felt like 89 outside. I was like,
no thanks.
that seems reasonable for 5:15 a.m. That seems like a reasonable temperature that it should be.
Yeah.
I don't know why anybody would find that uncomfortable.
Good
Fortunately, it only gets hotter as the day
Yes,
goes on.
one would think.
And more humid. Yeah. This is AV Rant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.com/avrant. So Google sent me a thing where YouTube is going to soon require a two-step authorization thingy.
Yeah.
This is behind the scene, behind baseball,
Yeah.
whatever it's called. So I did that.
Okay.
I don't know if that's going to mess you up at all.
I already had
did
it on my account, so when I clicked the link thingy that said it on our YouTube studio page, then it said,
Yeah.
you've already got two-step authentication. So I think
Oh,
we're
okay.
okay.
So we're okay. Well, I did it for the YouTube specific page,
Okay.
I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. We log in from
Anyway,
different
it doesn't
accounts,
matter.
so I think we're all right.
We're all right. All right. Anyways, YouTube. You want to contact Rob directly? Rob at avrant.com. His Twitter is at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. My wife is on Twitter quite a bit these days. She doesn't post, but she reads. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. I'm like, you've been real upset lately. She goes, yeah. I said, you should stop being on Twitter.
Yes, those things do seem to correlate quite easily.
I get on Twitter. It's like my screen is screaming at me. It's like, what is everybody so angry? I mean, I know what you're angry about. I'm angry about the same stuff, but I'm not talking about it. So I'm going to put this down. All right. I thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, to support this podcast in some way. If you can support us financially, feel free to go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which will send you to a PayPal donation site for a one-time donation. Take it from your credit card or from your PayPal account and send most of the money to us. So I'm going to thank Raf for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Raf.
Yes, indeed. Raf, thank you very much for the PayPal donation. Really do appreciate that.
Yeah, and then we also want to thank our 131 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service that you sign up to be a contributing subscriber, which means that every month they'll take a little bit of money from you, or however much you dictate, minimum of $1, and give most of it to us. So we have 131 patrons, and we want to thank you all.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you'd like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation, we've ticked over 130. We'll see how long that lasts, just like we'll see how long Tom's camera connection lasts, because I'm pretty sure that's not Skype. I'm pretty sure that's a camera thing that's been freezing his Skype camera there on and on. But yeah, we'll see.
I'm not unplugging it.
I know.
I'm not doing that. I'm not unplugging it. So what does it look like? Do I have to adjust
right
my
now?
Camera angle?
Yeah, the very top of your head has been cut off because we're on your, I think, laptop's built-in
we're on the
webcam
laptop
at this time. We can still see you, so that's good enough. But yeah, there we go. Very cool to see the number tick ever higher into a new decade of 131 patrons. At this time, we'll see if all of those stick around when the month changes over and people actually have to pay.
Right. So we've got Andrew sent I guess he sent permission to use his photos. I don't see the photos. Where are the photos?
Well, he's sent multiple photos in the past, so I guess you're free to dig back through all the old emails. Hey, Andrew, if you really want to help Tom out, resend all of your photos, because that would definitely help Tom.
Yeah.
But a big thank you for giving him permission to use those photos on avgadgets.com.
That's right.
Yes.
Where I am editor-in-chief and sole person who does everything over there. That's me.
There you go.
Everything. Not everything. Most things. all the stuff that you see.
Right.
I do. Stuff that behind the scenes Clint does. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during an ongoing and seemingly ever worsening pandemic. So we got some notes of gratitude from Jason, Shannon, Victor, Ian, who's part of the 2 Hour Plus Club, but he listens at 2.2 times speed, so he's done it in under an hour. So, and Gurinder. We must sound like chipmunks, right? At 2.2?
I mean, honestly, I listen to quite a few podcasts, and we're amongst the fastest talkers just at our normal speed, because there's a lot of podcasts that definitely speak slower than we do. So I listen to most podcasts at 1.5 times speed. That's what I prefer to do. For our own, I'd be like 1.25 would probably be fine for us, to my ears. I don't know how he listens at 2.2 and catches everything, because I wouldn't, and I know what we said. I was there when we recorded it, and I would have very difficult time understanding us at 2.2, but maybe Ian's brain is much faster than ours, and that is perfectly fine. So Jason, Shannon, Victor, Ian, and Gurinder, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement. They are definitely appreciated, and thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
That's right. And we goofed, and it looks like it was me that goofed. So
well, I didn't catch it, so that counts too.
Well, that's all right. That's not your fault. Last week we talked about Criterion's first Ultra HD Blu-ray disc releases. Last week, one of the titles is The Piano. That was directed and written by Jane Campion. Campion?
That's how it's spelled.
Campion?
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
Yep.
Anyways, I got that mixed up with The Pianist, who is by the child molester guy. So, Polanski. So, I am sorry to Miss Jane Campion for probably ruining your name as well. I did not mean to mix you guys up. I'm sure you don't like that.
Piano, pianist. We can see how that mix-up happened. That seems fairly self-explanatory.
So, that was Aras.
Aras.
Yeah, corrected us from that one. So thank you very much, because yes, I shouldn't.
Yeah, we don't want to be throwing disparaging comments about that to someone who truly does not deserve it, because they're a totally different person and it was a totally different movie. From
I mean, I'm just gonna say next time, just name it not something that sounds exactly like something else that I'm gonna get confused with. It seems clearly not my fault.
Well, yeah.
Let's be honest here.
We can see how the mix-up happened. These are not wildly different, dissociated words from one another.
Apologize. I do apologize.
Well, yeah, that was just an honest mistake mix-up. There we go. But I think it's worth mentioning and saying that, yes, we do apologize, because that was the wrong movie and the wrong person. There.
I apologize. All right. In the news, Monoprice has new Monolith subwoofer models. The first is the 13-inch THX Ultra Certified model. It's available and shipping now for $1,600. It's big.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of qualms with this subwoofer, I'm going to be honest with you. I have a couple of issues with this subwoofer. I don't think that it's... I think that, just like Too Long Didn't Read, it's a performer. It will absolutely do what you want it to do. It is a beast of a thing. I'm a little bit baffled by some of the design concepts that went on here. But anyways, 13-inch THX Ultra Certified models available and shipping now for $1,600. It's 20 by 24 by 29, so it's big. It's not. I mean, it's not I've seen 12-inch subwoofers in bigger cabinets than this. I think or about the same size. The EP500 wasn't that much smaller than this. It's the 29 inches.
EP500 was quite a bit smaller than this. That was only 15 inches wide and about 22 inches
really?
tall.
I thought it was 17 by 19 by something else.
It could have been. Well, when you're 20 by 24 by 29, that's substantially larger than that.
It's a big. The thing is, though, it's made out of HDF,
Yeah.
and that baffles me to quite an extent, because most of the people that I've talked to that are speaker designers don't like to use HDF, not because of the weight, which is significantly different than MDF, but also because it has a different resonance. It resonates at different frequencies. So a lot of times they steer away from it because of that. And that's why you see so much MDF rather than HDF. But they've made this out of HDF, and it weighs 153 pounds.
That it does.
This thing is a brick.
But it's no longer just cut off chamfered corners anymore. Now it is rounded corners. So everyone has remarked how it looks so much sleeker and so much more upscale and smooth and
whatever.
Visually
just try not to impale people.
Yes.
Just crush their toes and stuff. I mean, it's a 13-inch driver, but other brands might have easily called it a 15-inch since the face of the driver is actually that large. But Monoprice didn't include their large surround of the driver in its measurements. It uses a 2,000 watt or 3,800 watt peak amplifier. Split amplifier?
Yeah, it's in two pieces. Part of it is
that's right.
nailed to the top of the cabinet, and part of it is to the back. So they've split the amplifier into two
all
pieces.
All the bracing and
Yep.
stuff.
Yeah, we don't really see the bracing in the drawings.
No, you don't.
Just showing the amp and the driver.
It's
and
got
the
it.
ports.
I mean, there's only one other reason to split that amplifier like that, except for that. It has 3 ports. You can run it sealed with port plugs, with 2 ports open for an extension down to 16 hertz, or all 3 open for maximum output. And for whatever reason, there's not a rating for a single port open. Like
it's probably not recommended. It's all 3, 2, or 0.
Yeah. So it actually it can actually play a bit louder out than the Monolith 15-inch THX that uses a 1,000 watt amp and is 18 by 27 by 27 and a half, weighing a measly 129 pounds.
That's right.
So this is, I mean, like I said, this thing performs. It absolutely.
Oh yeah.
It actually has a weird notch at like 200 hertz for some reason.
Yeah. You shouldn't really be carrying too much above 200 hertz.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't understand. I mean, I
that's got to be a filter anomaly or something.
And I just look at that. I'm like, oh, God, I wish you guys had just cut this measurement off a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just like
done it at
just
150
like cut it off at
no
199. Yeah. Because people are going to see that and they're going to be like,
I see.
It's not going to be it's not. Look at that. That's a problem. How can I have a subwoofer that has that big of a dip right there? I'm like, because you'll never hear it in a million years. Yeah. So I mean, it's just so heavy and unwieldy. And I guess for me, I'd be like, you kind of look at this and this, how it plays in comparison to how loud, how much output it has in comparison to the PB3000.
Louder than that, it's right there with the PB4000. Yeah. That's what it would be, but costs less. But then the SVS has the app. So this is like kind of like take an SVS PB4000, make it a little bit bigger, to be honest. Not a huge amount, because the PB4000 is a big sub. But this Monolith 13-inch is even bigger, and then take away the app and lower the price. That's basically what you've done. But the performance is right there.
Yeah. The weight, though, is just nuts. I think that's the thing that gets me. It's like I felt like we had gotten past that, as an industry. I thought that, early SVS models that were like 250 pounds with, 2 12-inch drivers and a box the size of a stand-up piano laying on its side. I thought that we were past that, but I guess we're not. Anyways, Monoprice has also posted the product page for their Monolith 16-inch THX model, but they've said that that's not going to ship until October, and the specs aren't listed yet. What we do know, it'll have 4 ports. It's got 4 ports at the front of the thing. So.
That is very clear.
And I would imagine that if 153 pounds is too much for you, you ain't going to like the weight of this one.
It's not getting lighter.
It's
not getting smaller. It's not getting lighter.
Again, this is a 16-inch driver that other manufacturers might have called an 18.
Yeah.
It seems to be the same amp, but we're not really sure 100%, but it looks that way. And it's a even larger cabinet, and it's going to be about $2,000, which is pretty reasonable. I mean,
and once again, this is right up there if you're comparing to SVS's lineup, to the Ultra 16, the 60 or the PB16 Ultra. Once again, even slightly bigger than that, but $500 less, but doesn't have the app. So that's kind of the trade-offs that you're making.
Yeah. So the Onkyo TX-RZ50 receiver model is up on Onkyo's website. So Rob read through the manual and discovered some notes of interest. Now, I will be telling you that Rob is very thorough.
I was.
A lot. He was very thorough.
I'm not
and he sent me a bullet point list
I
so that I could go through and pick and choose what I wanted for the AV Gadgets article, which we will list up. And I took like the things I thought people would understand and care about. Because there was stuff in here that's like, if you decide to do a Zone 2, then you're going to steal your Height 1 amplifiers for some reason. I'm like, that's so Onkyo. You know what I mean? That's exactly Onkyo. Onkyo's always got some weird thing that you're like, what? Why? And everybody else, it's just Onkyo. This is as fast as they could get all these features into this product, so they did it.
So I'll try to sort of hit the highlights. The main ones are, this is the model you'll have to go through in their brand new lineup in order to have a full set of pre-outs. There are no cheaper models in their lineup that have a full set of pre-outs. It does have 9 amplifiers built in, but it can run 11 speakers in a 7.1.4 configuration. If you do that, you have to power the surround back speakers externally. There are no options. You can't choose which other pair of speakers gets powered externally. It's the surround backs, and the 9 amplifiers will power the remaining 9 speakers, or the pre-outs are also hot for all of those. But that was one thing to know. It does have a setup wizard. You can cross-pollinate as far as the up mixers go, so those are good things to know. We've mentioned before how HDMI ports 1, 2, and 3, those are the 40 gigabit per second ports. 4, 5, and 6 are 24 gigabits per second, which is a little unusual. It means it can actually do 4K 120, but only if you limit everything to 420, and no, it can still do 12-bit even at that, if you limit it to 420 instead of 444, so that was a little weird. But yeah, the sort of the downsides on this one, it's not a great Zone 2 receiver. Anything to do with Zone 2 is limited to stereo. That's basically the cut and dried part of it. You're not going to be playing something in the main zone in full surround sound or immersive audio while simultaneously listening to that same source in a 2-channel down mix out of Zone 2. Just can't do it. You can also choose Zone B instead of Zone 2, and that means Zone B and the main zone both play the same source, which is a weird way of delineating that function, but it's still limited to stereo everywhere. You can't do surround in main zone and a 2-channel down mix in Zone B either, so it's not great for Zone 2 stuff. It does have Dirac built in, and it still has Accu EQ, and if you use one or the other, you can't use the other. They're mutually exclusive to one another.
I was a little confused by that. So does Dirac do the auto setup, or do you have to do Accu EQ auto setup and then switch to Dirac?
No, you got to pick one or the other. Dirac will do the auto setup. It'll set your distances and levels, and if you use Dirac, you cannot also use Accu EQ, and vice versa. It's pick your poison, one or the other.
I don't understand why they wasted time putting Accu EQ into this, because no one's going to.
Because it's Onkyo when they own it, so it doesn't cost them anything. And in case somebody's an Accu EQ fan,
I have a feeling they just couldn't get it. They didn't have the time to get rid of it.
Yeah, right. Dirac in this one does have 3 memory slots, so you can run it 3 times with 3 different target curves that you select. You can either do it via an app on your phone, and it comes with a microphone. It comes with the Accu EQ microphone. Don't know how much faith I would put in that. So you can run Dirac off of your laptop with a USB microphone if you want to as well. That's an option there. Doesn't really have a great curves of equal loudness solution. It does have THX loudness plus, but you can only use that in the THX listening modes, and those don't work with Atmos or DTSX. 5.1 or 7.1 only. So you also cannot use THX loudness plus if you're using Dirac. So those things are mutually exclusive, and I probably wouldn't think that's great. It does have IMAX Enhanced. You can turn off IMAX Enhanced stupid bass management or non-bass management that it does by default.
It's so weird the way they do that.
They have labeled it IMAX bass feeding. That's what you're looking for in the settings.
That's just
I found that interesting. Found that kind of funny. You can separate.
I feel like there's like a little IMAX fish, and you have to feed it.
Right. You can separate the ARC and eARC settings from the rest of HDMI CEC, so that's nice. You can have ARC or eARC turned on without having to also turn on the rest of CEC. So yeah, let's see what else. Bluetooth in and out. It's got a 12-volt trigger on the back there, and it has 3 different IR remote IDs if you're using multiple different AV receivers and don't want them to cross-talk to each other with with remotes. So yeah, that's pretty much the highlights. I read the manual cover to cover. That's what I picked out of it.
Okay. Very exciting. And on a bit of a related side note, Jason was informed by Crutchfield has a Yamaha Avantage RX A6A receiver. Pre-order got changed from expected ship date of August 17th to unknown. B&H is saying they now expect it to ship in October, just like the Onkyo receivers.
Parts, shipping lanes. I guess that's what it is. If that thing still needs a firmare update after it comes
updates
out,
is what
the Yamaha I'm talking about.
Updates. I'm telling you.
I mean, if it's already shipped, I guess they can't put the updated firmware on it before it ships at this point.
That's right. They
Lordy.
That's what's happening. That's my theory. All right, DTS announced DTS Play-Fi Home Theater. They took a swipe at WISA by saying their system doesn't require any adapters, dongles, or add-on boxes. Certain TVs, no specific models named, but almost certainly from Philips in Europe, that have DTS Play-Fi built in will be able to add a pair of Play-Fi surround speakers and up to 2 Play-Fi subwoofers, all using your existing Wi-Fi network. You can also replace the TV's built-in speakers up front with a Play-Fi soundbar or a pair of Play-Fi speakers that is supposed to arrive this year. So, and then the whole world went, wait, Play-Fi still's the thing?
Yeah.
I really did. I thought Play-Fi was, when I used it, it was quite good. Now, I used it with some dedicated speakers that the speakers like.
And it's been stereo only up to this point. So this is their venture into surround sound. Not immersive audio. It's not doing Atmos. It's 5.2. That's what it can possibly do. Actually, it sounds more like 4.2.
I was going to say, 4.2.
They never mentioned adding a center speaker anywhere in anything that they talked about it. So it seems
because I don't think you can buy a single Play-Fi speaker by itself.
Right?
You have
they
to
always
buy
come
them
in pairs. Yeah.
So this comes from Karl. Researchers at Ohio State University has demonstrated plates with embedded metamaterial resonators that successfully reduce the transmission of vibrations versus a control. Regardless of how the plates were secured or held in place or simply suspended. Unlike traditional vibration dampening methods, nothing is added to the plates. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The metamaterial resonators are cut out of the plates, reducing weight and mass rather than increasing them. For this reason, immediate applications for airplanes and cars come to mind, but the plates can also be sandwiched between other materials such as drywall and effectively reduce vibrations that way as well. So, yeah.
These are, if you've looked at the disc that is now inside of the KEF LS50 Meta, where it's this disc with all kinds of different lengths of sort of tubes, and it's all cut out of nanostructures. If you got right down there with might have to go to an electron microscope to actually see the full structure there, because it is in the nanometer type of range that these little tubes are constructed. It's usually out of sort of like a carbon fiber type of material. Right. So yeah, the idea is that here we have these plates. You have this metamaterial resonator tubes that are cut out of the plate. So this isn't adding more mass. It's actually reducing the mass of the plate to turn it into a metamaterial
series of tubes. Yeah, but this isn't a wideband absorber. It's like one...
it'll be similar to the KEF LS50 where, based on the shape and the length of the tubes, you can go across a range of frequencies, but it won't be they weren't able to do it in the KEF LS50 metas across the entire audible frequency range. It was sort of like the upper mid-range and up, and it definitely wasn't down into the bass. But I guess if you made a plate large enough and tubes long enough, you could absorb bass as well, or damp it rather. Anyway, it's an interesting thing. I don't know if it'll be applicable to home theater builds at some point, but yeah, anything to do with acoustics and vibration damping. Always nice to see new advancements being made.
You put them in restaurants, dude.
Nah.
That's where the stuff is really needed. Any way that you can make restaurants less loud would be fantastic. Some comments from listeners. Paul, a while ago, Paul asked if he should go to the trouble of crawling into his attic to replace a 32-foot HDMI cable. He had added an Apple TV 4K to his setup, and he loved the match frame rate feature versus everything being 60 frames per second with judder from his TV's built-in apps. But when he plugged it into his AV receiver or even straight into the 32-foot HDMI cable, the Apple TV signal wasn't making it to a CX OLED. The Apple TV worked perfectly if you plugged it straight into the TV with a short HDMI cable. So we asked whether his AV receiver supported eARC, just regular ARC. Turns out he's got an Onkyo TX-NR545. So that's regular ARC only, and it doesn't pass through Dolby Vision. So for the time being, he's keeping the Apple TV plugged straight into his TV. He bought a 35-foot active HDMI cable from Monoprice, and when he tested it, it seems to work fine. All of this is a pain because a 32-foot cable he put into his attic said it was HDMI 2.0 and 18 gigabits per second, but it was some no-name brand on Amazon, and apparently they were... He says lying. I'm gonna say
well, that was my word.
Optimistic.
I put that in there. It was not certified. We know that. And apparently the lack of certification did mean something in this case. Also, I do think it was what I mentioned before, because the link he actually sent to, it was like the entire range, like all the lengths. I bet at 6 feet, that cable works perfectly fine. At 32 feet, the same
Not so much.
thing doesn't work at 18 gigabits per second anymore. Yeah.
So anyways, lesson learned, always go for a properly certified HDMI cable and always test its maximum resolution before you put it inside your wall.
Yes, that is a good idea.
I did that, but then now there's 4K and a bunch of other stuff, so who knows?
Ultra high speed didn't exist when Tom put his cable in his wall.
Yeah. So Gurinder had purchased both a Sony A80J OLED and a LG CX OLED, and he was comparing them to each other. Most of the reviews out there said the Sony was supposed to be a bit better, but all along, Rob has said he prefers LG, so why wasn't Rob better at convincing him ahead of time, huh? Because he wound up returning the Sony and keeping the LG. Yeah. I know, Rob.
I know. It's like how I never mentioned Ascend speakers. Why don't I talk them up?
We actually haven't been recommending very many speakers like in general lately. Like that hasn't been.
We have
the
an opportunity later on coming up. Yeah.
I'm not going to recommend.
We sort of have our usual suspects at this point, and I'm not anticipating.
I know, at this point, I'm just like
venturing from them with the question that's coming up. But,
I was surprised to find out through YouTube advertising that REL is actually REL. Like they say it.
They say REL?
They do. They say REL in the advertisement. REL, we do nothing but make speakers. I'm like, really? You're going to pronounce it? It just seems weird.
Is it even an acronym? I don't know if REL stands for something, if that's an initialism. I mean, it's pronounceable, so it is an acronym. I mean it's all capitalized.
Shoe is not an acronym, but we all say HSU.
Because they capitalized all three letters.
They capitalized all three letters of REL.
If you just say, go search for a shoe subwoofer, a lot of people won't know to spell it HSU, so it's easier to spell it out when we're speaking it out loud. Whatever.
I just think it's
weird. I think if you said REL, it's not like they're going to be super upset. And we don't really ever recommend them anyway, so it's usually when someone's asking about it that it comes up.
We do sometimes, don't the one of them that we do, the real small one or whatever? I thought we did sometimes.
Not usually.
All right, questions here. Bertrand from Quebec. Bertrand is very happy with his completely blacked out home theater. We'd show you pictures, but it's just black.
I mean, there's some light reflecting off of mainly the seats. Everything else is like really matte and light reflective.
If you had gotten non-leather seats, it would have been even darker.
Yeah, the microfiber black fabric on the seats, that would have done it. Yep.
So it's a small room, only 12 by 14 by 7. He's got his Martin Logan Motion Series speakers all around in the 5.2.4 configuration, including the Motion 60 XTI towers for his front, left, and right. So let me see if I can see those. I can't see it.
They are there.
Anyways, we had recommended going with bookshelves instead of towers, but he had an idea in his mind all along, and he loved to look at the towers in a room where you can't see them. Yeah. So he stuck to his guns. Well, it turns out that with the room being so black, the looks of the speakers aren't that important after all. And bookshelves, the Motion 35 XTI to be exact, would be easier to position ideally. Plus, with his dual subwoofers, the added bass extension the towers isn't really being utilized, so he needs a pair of speakers for upstairs in the living room. Would it make sense to move the towers up there and then get the bookshelf models for the theater? Would we expect him to hear any difference, positive or negative? I bet you're going to notice a difference upstairs when you move those towers up there, but I think in this small itty-bitty theater where you're sitting like feet, arm's length from a speaker, that the bookshelves are going to be just fine. So yes, you should have listened to us, and at least me. I know I would have said get bookshelves. I say it all the time.
I mean, not only just fine, I think there's a chance that the bookshelves will sound better because you will be able to position them more ideally. That would be the main thing. Like, I don't think
that has been my experience in my smallish home theater, is that the bookshelves are, it just seems like they resolve closer to each other. You can resolve that soundstage, that center image, and then towers, and you need it to be a little bit further back for them to resolve for me in here with my Veris Grand speakers. So yeah, I definitely prefer the Bookshelves in the smaller room.
I do not foresee any downgrade in the sound quality. It's not as though your treble is suddenly going to change. It's nothing like that. If it's anything that is audibly different, it's going to be an improvement just from mainly being able to position them better. So yes, I am all for this plan. I'm assuming upstairs it's just going to be the pair of speakers by themselves, playing in a room that probably isn't acoustically treated. Using the towers up there makes a lot of sense to me since you already own them, and grabbing another pair of 35 XTI bookshelf speakers for your theater, I think, is the way to go.
Right. So his Marantz SR8015 receiver has 11 amps built in. He purposely designed the layout of his theater so that surround backs could be added if he wants them. He's found that he prefers to use the DTS Neural X upmixer for most content, so would adding surround back speakers enhance the experience? And if he adds them, should there be a matching pair of 35 XTI bookshelves, or could he get away with smaller and less expensive Motion 2i models that he's using on his ceiling for Atmos? There is no world in which I would put surround back speakers in this room. It's so small.
I think he's got enough. He's got just enough space.
Where is the door? Where's the door?
The what would be the rear left corner. So if we're seeing the final picture there, we're seeing the surround speaker in the back there, the left seat over there.
I just don't think there's going to be enough differentiation if you try to have
between surrounds and surround backs.
Yes, they're going to be like.
But his surrounds are on stands, so he could move his surrounds a little bit farther forward. So that, because I mean, he's got them in the ideal 5 speaker setup right now, where they're at the 120 degree angles, a little bit farther back. He can move them up to 100 degrees to the left and right, ever so slightly behind his seats, and then he could put. I mean, I would definitely go for the 2i. There's no reason to get the 35 XTI bookshelf speakers and somehow either stand them or mount them on the back, while the 2i, he was saying he doesn't really want to mount anything on the walls. Well, the 2i can go on little stands, not very beefy stands, because the 2i's are not big or heavy. I would definitely go for a pair of those. They're cheaper, they're smaller.
Definitely buy them from some place you could easily return them to.
Oh, sure. You can get them at Best Buy.
I don't really think that you're gonna
need.
you're gonna I'll be honest with you, when I did a similar setup, I ended up just literally unplugging my surround back speakers because they weren't helping at all. So,
no surprise here. Tom is not in favor. I am more in favor. I do agree, though. If you can get them from someplace, you can return them in case you do not like the results. That is good. But yeah, Best Buy, you can get them, so that's pretty easy.
Yeah, I'd go with the small ones as well.
Oh, yeah.
So do we have any suggestions for finding a home theater specialist who could come to his theater and basically just talk through optimization and settings with him? I mean, isn't that what we do?
But not physically in person. We do not go step by step in person through all the settings.
You never offered to pay us enough to do that. So have you considered that? He doesn't necessarily want a full audio-video calibration done for him, but he'd like to talk to somebody who is an expert in those areas and go through everything with him in person as a learning experience. He looked up ISF-certified calibrators in Quebec. The only listings on ISF or Image Science Foundation's website were Best Buy Geek Squad, which didn't inspire a lot of confidence in Bertrand's opinion. So any suggestions? THX also has certified calibrators.
But they haven't been doing that for a while. So
but anybody who took that class was hardcore. So
right. But speaking of who might have taken that class, there is the person who would have been teaching that class, who is Michael Chen, who is available to contact over at Lion AV. Michael is Canadian. He does sort of like tours, calibration tours.
He actually taught my THX class.
There you go. He knows whereof he speaks. He is definitely someone who could do what you're asking. So it's not, as far as working out the scheduling.
Be prepared for a lot of Star Trek jokes. In case you're wondering what you're getting yourself into, it's Star Trek jokes. The man loves the Star Trek.
But
he's a really nice guy, but he's super geek, and that's exactly what you want at a calibrator.
Yes,
I know. So he comes in there with like all swag and swagger and stuff like that. You'd be like, "You sure you know what you're doing?" He comes in like, "Live long and prosper." You're like, "Thank you."
Feels exactly right. What I want. Just feels right. So whether you'll be able to work out, mutually agreeable scheduling and price, I'm not sure, but that is certainly somebody that is contactable through Lion AV and is quite a possibility of someone you might be able to work with for exactly what you asked for.
Right. All right, Patrick. Patrick lives in one of the areas where NextGen TV, aka ATSC 3.0 broadcasts, are actually available. Mm-hmm. He's got an antenna, so he'd figure he'd pick up a new tuner to take advantage of it. Easier said than done. The only option he came across was HD Home Run Connect 4K, which is a network tuner, and it's unavailable. Is that really the only game in town? I'll be honest with you, man. This just the tuners are such a nightmare. You would think that this would be something that would not be that hard to do, but once they stopped putting them in TVs, like they just got terrible. And now the cable companies and the satellite companies have their proprietary systems that they use for the guides and stuff like that. And for me, the problem whenever I shop for tuners, because I do it periodically, thinking I want to do it because I have an antenna, is I end up with getting dissuaded by the fact that the guides are terrible and the DVRs are terrible and everything's too expensive. So what you got, Rob?
Yeah, as far as actual televisions that have NextGen TV tuners built into them, just like the old days where you could just hook up an antenna straight to your TV and watch some TV free over the air. That is actually one thing I always neglect to mention, difference in LG's OLED lineup between the C series and the G series. The G series, as far as the G10 and the G1 from last year and this year, those have NextGen TV tuners built into them. I always neglect to mention that, but you could hook an antenna directly to one of those if you want to buy an entirely new television, but you wouldn't be able to record anything, and you could only watch one channel. I mean, it's just a single over-the-air tuner that's built into it, but it is an ATSC 3.0 next-gen TV tuner. But yeah, as far as outboard tuners go, right now, it is Silicon Dust with their HD Home Run network tuners. That's the only game in town right now. And the Connect 4K, that was like a Kickstarter program thing that they did. So the one that's actually available for sale is called the Flex 4K. That's what you got to look for, is the HD Home Run Flex 4K. You can buy it right off of Amazon. It's $200. Now that has 4 tuners. 2 of them are ATSC 3.0 next-gen TV tuners, and the other 2 are ATSC 1.0, our regular HD tuners. So you can watch and record as many as 4 programs, but only 2 of them in ATSC 3.0, the 4K and HDR, all that stuff is on next-gen TV. At least gives you 2 tuners. The way this works is you connect your antenna to the Flex 4K, the HD Home Run unit. That's where the antenna gets plugged into. That tuner gets plugged in with an Ethernet cable to your home's router, your network router. That's where that goes in. To actually watch it on your television, you use an Apple TV 4K or an Amazon Fire TV streaming device. Those have an HD Home Run app on them. So that's what you actually plug physically into your television to watch. So those are, of course, all connected to the same network at home, and that's how you watch things. And HD Home Run has their own DVR recording software that you can pay a yearly subscription for. It's not that much. It's like $50 or $60 a year, so it's not too bad. But yeah, that's what's going on there. So the options are either wait, because more will eventually come once ATSC 3.0 launches properly, but right now it's basically still beta and trial areas. He lives in a trial area. It'd be nice to use it, but that's the only game in town. HD Home Run Flex 4K, $200.
Okay. Dave needs a 30-foot HDMI cable. It's going between his Marantz SR5011 and the BenQ HT3550 projector, so he can do 4K and HDR, but not any of the HDMI 2.1 stuff. Should he still get one of the ultra-high-speed HDMI cables we've been recommending recently, or is there something else we'd recommend? So, I mean, he doesn't need
ultra-high speed for what he has right now.
Right, he doesn't need that. So
he
just needs something that can do has enough bandwidth for
how
long? 30 foot?
30 foot. And that's sort of the key here, because I mean, of course, if it's easy and affordable, getting an ultra high speed HDMI cable now, because I'm assuming this going to a projector and 30 feet long, it's probably going through wall and ceiling or something along those lines. Or at the very least, it's being routed around the perimeter of your room or something. So if you want to not have to do that again at some point, if and when we get HDMI 2.1 capable projectors, then getting an ultra high-speed cable now makes sense. But to go over 23 feet, which is the longest copper ultra high speed cable that's out there. To go 30 feet, you'd have to go to the fiber optic. And so you're looking at, around $100 right now. The 30-foot long ultra high-speed fiber optic cable from Monoprice, at the moment we're recording this on August 24th, 2021, is on sale for $93. Normally it sells for $113, so it's $20 off right now if you happen to catch it while that sale is going on. But around $100 is what you're looking at for the 30-foot fiber optic cable. So if that's just more than you wanted to spend, you can spend half that amount on a premium high speed, that's the 18 gigabits per second, and at 30 feet you'd want to go for an active HDMI cable. So it's not fiber optic, it's not passive copper, it's the active version of it. The two that we always recommend are either Blue Jeans cable, they've got their Series 3 active, and that's $50 for the 30-foot length from them, or over at Monoprice, the Dynamic View premium high-speed active HDMI cables. The price over there is $57. That's unusual. Monoprice is actually more expensive than Blue Jeans cable on this particular one. But there you go. One of those will get the job done. And yeah, the active premium high-speed will not be future-proof for your 40 and 48 gigabits per second, but it's twice the price to get the fiber optic.
Jason's 8-year-old son has taken a real interest in cassette tapes. He just really likes them in his classic yellow Sony Walkman.
Yeah.
I used to like my yellow Sony Walkman as well. Probably damaged my hearing in more ways than one, playing it too loud. So he wants to make mixtapes, but Jason got rid of his Nakamichi dual tape deck decades ago. So are there any reasonably priced dual tape decks still available? Acceptable sound quality is all he's looking for. Yeah, dude, I would 100% go to a flea market or a what do you call the stupid shops where they
pawn
take
shops?
Money? Pawn shops. Yeah, I would go to pawn shops. That's 100% what I would do. Boombox is still. I haven't shopped for a boombox in a while, but the last time I shopped for a boombox, they still were rocking cassettes and sometimes dual cassettes. So
right.
That's what I would look for.
Yeah, as far as shopping new, there aren't a lot of choices. The one that you'll almost certainly come across. Now, it's branded from Marantz. In fact, it's branded Marantz Professional, and the model number is the PMD300CP. It's $160. It's not what I would call inexpensive, but it's not ridiculous because there is another dual tape deck, professional dual tape deck out there. It's sold both under like THX and I don't know, some other brand sells the exact same thing, just branded differently, but that one's like $600. So compared to that, $160 seems somewhat reasonable. But like, people are like, yeah, this doesn't really seem like a Marantz professional product because it doesn't have all the Dolby noise reduction built in, and it's slow. Like,
what is the gain knob on the back of this thing?
I don't know.
There is a gain knob on the back next to the USB port?
I don't know.
That's insane. What is this thing?
I don't really know. A lot of people aren't like super happy about it, but they're more like real cassette enthusiasts who are looking for top-notch sound quality, and they're like, it's Marantz Professional, it should be top-notch, and it isn't really, but it seems perfectly functional, and for what you're talking about, it would absolutely be fine for just dubbing and making mixtapes, but yeah, $160. I don't know if you want to pay that much, but that's about the cheapest because I did find like a boombox over at B&H Photo. It's your classic portable boombox with a dual tape deck. In fact, it also has a CD deck on the top of it. It's from a company called Caliphone. Yeah. It's the only, I don't even know the model number because it's the only one you'll find, but it's $235. Which seems a little bit expensive for, a dual tape deck boombox, but that's like all I could find. And I'm assuming Jason probably found those via Google searches too, and was hoping there was something a bit better than that. All I can suggest to you is used. Our friend Karl, who sends us all kinds of articles and news items, he's on a bit of a cassette kick right now because he finds it amusing that there's a crowd out there that is trying to make cassettes come back the way vinyl came back. So yeah, he's linked up to an article about cassettes refuse to die. I'm like, yeah, technically I guess that's true, but the cassettes are not coming back. But if your kid wants to play around with them, I'd try to just find a used tape deck. That's got to be the best solution to this. Yeah. Otherwise, I guess $160 for the Marantz. It'll get the job done. I don't know if you want to spend that much.
And if you look at the reviews of that, they're saying that's the exact same model that sold for less, exact same box with different branding on it from other companies, so you can
particularly
find
Pile, but you can't find the Pile one. It's not available anywhere. So the Marantz is like kind of the only game in town. There you go.
Yeah, good luck, Alex. Is there a general rule when it comes to speaker toe-in? You could fire them straight ahead, not aiming at the middle seat at all. You can toe them in a little, so they cross at a point somewhere behind the middle seat. You could aim them directly at the middle seat, or you could toe them in so much that they cross in front of the middle seat. Clearly, there's personal preference involved, but are there any overarching rules that apply to these options, or is it specific to speakers, the room, and positioning? In his case, he's using Ascend Sierra 2 EX bookshelf speakers with their raw ribbon tweeters. He's got a 3-seater couch, and he's sitting about 7 feet away. If we had a wider seating area, would that change what would be the best in terms of toe-in? What specifically should we be listening for in order to find the best toe-in and to create the best sweet spot? So, what affects toe-in more than anything, of course, is the tweeter.
The dispersion
of the tweeter. That's like the number one thing, and then you have to worry about your room and how it's placed and everything else. All that stuff,
and that's including distance from speakers to walls, from speakers to you, and side walls, how wide apart the side walls are. Those do all have an impact. So I can't really say there's like a literal one size fits all when it comes to towing in speakers. It can definitely change depending on the speakers themselves, for sure, because different speakers do have different dispersion characteristics.
Right.
So it's not as though there's a one-size-fits-all tow-in recommendation that applies to all speakers of every kind and every brand. Definitely not. And then the room does play an impact, and your positioning within that room, both the speakers relative to the walls and where your seat is relative to the speakers on the walls. All of those things do play a role. So it is, I would say trial and error is sort of the best way to come at this. Tom and I have different methods of trial and error. I guess we can go through those quickly once again if we'd like to. But Tom's better at describing what it is you're actually listening for when you're doing your trial and error of exactly how much toe-in you want.
Yeah, so I've had to set up just dozens of speakers in different rooms across the years as I have had to review them. And there's a couple of things that you want to really listen for. Okay. And of course, the most important thing is that you have a solid center image,
right,
which means no matter what you're listening to, the vocals should almost certainly seem like, unless you're listening to something very strange, should be anchored in between the two speakers, and that happens at lots of different toe-in angles. So that can happen very easily. Some speakers, of course, electrostatics would be a little bit different, but you would want to just make sure that you need that solid center image.
It's that convincing phantom center where you would swear that your center speaker is on when it isn't, or maybe you don't even have a physical center speaker. You would swear that you do have one. That's the type of phantom center imaging that we're hoping to have. But it is often tough to get that outside of just the very middle seat. If you're trying to still have that very convincing phantom center image in the seats to your left and right, that is where the trial and error comes in. So, if you want to carry on.
So, the next thing you want to do is you want to listen for the width of the soundstage, if that makes sense. Okay, so the way I do this is I have a couple different tracks that I use that have a left to right pan, that pans from one side of the room to the other side of the room. That's the way that the music was mixed, and that's what they were going for. So I listen for where it starts and where it stops, so that, and of course that it convincingly goes across the entire front soundstage. So let's say you have your speakers pointed straight forward. You have what you think is a fairly convincing center image, and you put your left to right pan in, and as it pans, it seems to start outside the room, which is great, and then it comes across that speaker, and then sort of dips in volume and sort of maybe disappears slightly, and then appears in the other speaker and keeps going till it's outside the room. Well, your speakers aren't towed in enough. You're losing some imaging there in the center. So you want to tow them in a little bit more, and then you can kind of position it. You test back and forth. as far as, like Rob said, sitting in different seats and making sure that you're still getting that same convincing center image and the panning back and forth. There's going to be some trade-off between making sure that you have the center image, that you have a good pan all the way through the front, all the way through the soundstage, and the width. You're going to have to lose some width in order to make sure that you still get that convincing soundstage. My thing is I point them straight forward and I listen, and I point them straight at me and I listen, and I'm like, okay, so straight at me almost certainly should give me the best center image and the narrowest.
If you are smack dab in the middle seat,
right? If you're in the middle seat, I'm doing this always by myself. If you are in the middle seat, it should it should give you the most convincing center image and the narrowest sound stage. Left to right soundstage or right to left soundstage. So, I compare the straightforward to the straight at me, and there's been speakers that I have listened to that I've been like, those sound exactly the same. There's no difference between those two things.
Toe them in, don't toe them in steep, toe them in a little. There's almost no change. I would say, going back, like the Polk RTI series, that to me is a example of that, where you could aim them almost anyway, and the imaging really did not change.
Doesn't matter. Well, Vance Dixon, whatever his name is, his speakers, especially when he worked at or for Atlantic Technology, were like that. I mean, they were just you could just point them wherever. Didn't matter.
Right.
Didn't matter at all. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Other speakers are going to be a lot more finicky, and your raw ribbon tweeters are probably going to be towards the more finicky side. So that's like my process.
Sure.
So, I listen to them directly at me, I listen straight forward, and then I see the differences. If it seems like I get a much wider soundstage, but the center isn't as convincing, when they're straight out, but it's much more convincing, but a much more narrow soundstage when they're pointed directly at me. And I start adjusting until I feel like I've got the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, like you say, you can have them crossing directly in front of you as well.
Yeah.
It's unusual for us to recommend that. It does happen. It's usually in very compromised placements as far as
I wanted to say, you don't just want to stop when you're going from the range of pointed straight ahead to pointed straight at you. Don't necessarily stop right there. Keep towing them in even farther so that, yes, their pads would cross in front of you. That can be worth trying. Actually, I would say in his situation particularly, because he's got quite a short seating distance and a three-seater couch. So if he wants a wider sweet spot across all three seats, or he was talking about maybe his seating will get even wider than that, that is an instance where you're quite close to the speakers, but you want to cover a wide seating area where towing them in extra heavily, towing them in beyond just pointing straight at the middle seat, where they'd actually cross in front of the middle seat. That can often be what works best in that type of scenario. My process is a little different than Tom's. I put on some pink noise out of one speaker at a time, and I get right up close. I physically get right up close to the speaker, like within a foot of the speaker, and I listen to the pink noise bang on axis, and then I move ever so slightly off axis to the left or the right. And what you'll usually find with most speakers is that bang on axis versus a tiny hair to the left or right does not sound 100% identical. But then from that ever so slightly off axis out to maybe it's 15 degrees off center, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 45 degrees off center, depends on the speaker. It'll sound really quite uniform. The timbre of that pink noise will remain sounding really quite uniform in that sort of wedge. And then once you get past the whatever it is, 15, 30, 45 degree off center mark, you'll start to notice a change in timbre. And some speakers, it's really quite an abrupt change. It's almost like someone drew a boundary line and you go to this side, it sounds uniform, all the way. And then to the other side, there's an abrupt change. Some of them, it's a very gradual change, and it's tough to notice. So certainly is speaker dependent, but that way I can sort of draw a cone of dispersion coming out the front of this speaker. Maybe it's plus or minus 15 degrees to either side of center, maybe it's plus or minus 30, whatever it might be, but I can sort of draw that cone of dispersion. But like I say, most speakers, the bang on axis sound versus ever so slightly off axis sounds a bit different. So for that reason, if you're looking for one sort of general rule of thumb, a lot of people, they will listen to their speaker pointed straight at them. They're sitting in the middle seat and they're getting that bang on axis sound. And they're like, that is where this speaker sounds the most detailed, where I can pick out the most treble detail. And therefore, anything else is a downgrade. Anything else is a compromise. I would... advise as an overarching rule to try and put that out of your mind, because it's more important what takes place over that much wider wedge of like 1 degree off center to 30 degrees off center. All sounds pretty uniform. That's what the speaker actually sounds like. That's what's coming off of your sidewalls. That's what's reflecting off of your back wall and your ceiling and off of the sidewalls, of course, is that much larger wedge of sound, cone of sound, where it is much more uniform. So I would encourage paying attention to that. I would rarely have speakers pointed right at me in the middle seat. It's unlikely that that's going to work for a wide seating area. It's unlikely that it's going to sound uniform even for you in the middle seat, because if you move your head even a little bit, that collapses a bit. So that's how I come at it. I look at what that cone of dispersion is, and I simply try to have all of the seats that I care about, which is usually a 3-seater couch, within that cone of dispersion. And when you're sitting quite close to the speakers, sometimes that means quite a heavy toe in, so that the speaker that's, if you're talking about the front right speaker, then the leftmost seat, sometimes you have to toe in the speaker quite a bit if you're sitting close to keep everything within that cone. So that's how I come at it.
Okay. Mark has, I didn't skip anything, did I? No.
Nope.
Okay. Mark has a Panamax MR4300. It provides surge protection and power filtration. It has a 3-prong plug, but it also has a separate ground lug on the back. What's that for? Should it be connected to anything? The manual labels it, but doesn't say what it's for or how to use it. Yeah, so if you needed to manually ground something, like a turntable would be the thing that would come to my mind right away, because a lot of times you had to run a ground wire to them. That would be my guess. The other guess would be I've had some subwoofer amplifiers that had like what's called a ground lift, and it was a screw that you would just remove, and it would, if you had a ground loop, like that hum that we talk about sometimes, you remove the screw and it removes the hum.
Right.
By lifting
it takes away the third prong from the subwoofer itself. That's what it's doing. And then assuming that nothing on the outside of the subwoofer is metallic that a person could touch, then that's what the safety concern isn't so great. The whole reason we have grounding device, like 3-prong plugs and the grounding plug on electrical devices, is when they have a metal outboard chassis or some piece of metal on the outside that someone could conceivably touch, and if it doesn't have a ground connection, well, guess where the electricity is going if there happens to be some kind of power problem. It's going into the person who touched it. That's why we have grounded devices on items that there really is no electrical path if someone touches it. That's why you'll have the 2-prong plugs. Those aren't grounded. But yeah, it does say in the manual what you are relying on as far as the Panamax itself is proper wiring in your house and 3-prong receptacles. You should not be relying on any sort of separate ground termination connection for the Panamax itself. So if you were thinking that you see this ground lug on the back and maybe that should be connected to like its own grounding rod, or it should be wired to some part of your electrical panel or something like that, absolutely not. That is clearly stated in the manual that you are relying on the 3-prong plug of the Panamax itself, and it will actually tell you. It has a readout on the front. It will warn you if there is a grounding or other wiring problem with the outlet that it's plugged into. So as far as that goes, that's what is there. The grounding lug is there, exactly like Tom said. It's for other devices that sometimes, for some strange reason, have a separate grounding terminal on them. That gives you a place to connect it so that all your grounds are the same, right? Everything that's plugged into the Panamax is all grounded to that 3-prong plug that's coming out of the Panamax. That's your ground connection. If you have some other device that only has a 2-prong plug but it has a separate grounding lug of its own, this gives you a place to connect that so that everything is sharing ground.
The only thing that really makes sense there is record players have that quite often.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I can think of that would have that. Like, I haven't seen a device with
it's older devices. It's going way back. You did see that on some old amplifiers. They had a separate grounding lug. So I think it's mostly for that sort of legacy devices.
I need to move this camera. I keep looking at the wrong camera.
Because usually, whatever you're plugging your phono record player in, whatever preamp you're plugging that into usually has the grounding pin on it. So it's kind of unusual to have a phono input with no grounding pin. Yeah.
Jason. First up, Jason wanted to mention that he ordered 3 Valencia Verona recliners to upgrade his front row of seating. They mistakenly shipped him 2 of the Syracuse model and only 1 of the Verona model. That's a very strange thing to have happen. But they quickly corrected their mistake, so he's happy with the purchase in the end.
I'll bet somebody else out there got 2 Verona seats that they hadn't ordered. Yeah. That's probably what happened.
So he is renovating his theater, and plans are underway to replace the built-in cutouts on the front wall with a new custom cabinet that will house a new 83-inch OLED and provide some storage. The overall room dimensions are 12.5 wide by 18 by 6.5, essentially.
Sure.
And he sits about 9 feet from eyes to screen. So I guess this is a model, or...
Yeah, so we're seeing like a rendering of his proposed new cabinet that would have an 83-inch OLED sort of recessed within it, and then some a place for his center speaker below that, and some doors that would have storage. He was actually saying don't pay too much attention to where the center speaker shows up in the rendering, because that's not the final plan, and he actually wants to have it higher than that. But in the original renderings that he has, he's still got his tower speakers to the left and right, and then this sort of built-in cabinet. Looking at his theater, these were older photos, so he doesn't have the new Valencia Verona seats in his photos, but this lets us see what his theater looks like currently. We've seen his theater before, but it's always good to have a reminder.
Yeah. So while he is working with his custom cabinet maker, he's also considering his next speaker upgrade. At the moment, he has Paradigm Monitor V7 series speakers all around, Monitor 11 V7 towers up front, along with matching center and surround, 3 bipole surround and surround back speakers mounted on the walls. Anyways, he has... What? It's just a surround 3 bipole.
The surround 3 is the model. It is a bipole.
Oh, surround 3.
Yeah, the surround 3 is the model. It's a bipole. And so he's got them on his side and back walls, and they are elevated. So he's got the clear line of sight, and he doesn't have Atmos speakers at this point. He's got a low ceiling, so it looks, to our eye, it looks like his surround speakers are higher than they are, but they are elevated so that he has clear line of sight to both rows of seats.
So he's naturally gravitated towards the new Paradigm Founder series. That's one step down from the flagship Persona series. I feel like there's a P theme going on in this. From top to bottom, Paradigm series go Persona, Founder, Premiere, and Monitor SE. The Founder series are the first Paradigm speakers to use coaxial drivers in some of the models, and all of the drivers are made out of an aluminum magnesium alloy. Jason was specifically thinking of getting the 40B bookshelf model, replace his left-right towers, and the huge 90C sensor. He's in Canada, so that will cost close to $6,000 Canadian for those 3. Switching to the bookshelf models might mean a change in the custom cabinet design. He would also need to alter the cabinet for the large 90C center, but his first question is this. The 90C is sealed with passive radiators on the front, while his current sensor is re-reported. Odyssey has always set his current sensor to large, so he manually changes it to small, but he assumes that happens because his ported sensor is recessed into an enclosure. So will the 90C sealed design be better if he still recesses it into a custom cabinet? Would it be better to go with a sealed center speaker in general? Could we comment on ported versus sealed speakers when it comes to using them in enclosures? So center speakers in particular are often built with the idea that they're going to be shoved into a cabinet in some way, shape, or form at some point, right? So they'll often put a switch in the back of them that'll have boundary compensation, and all it really does is
we don't really see that often, to be fair.
Yeah. So I mean, mine has it.
Yeah.
So, and
so
Vera's Grand,
no.
the Vera's Grand had it.
Yeah,
so,
the Vera's Grand.
Having sealed a sealed design with, it's basically the passive radiators up front is essentially the same as ports, having front ported speakers.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just they even call it the same design as the base reflex design.
Yeah.
So, speaking on that, first of all, don't worry about what Odyssey sets your speakers as, large or small, because that can change from time you run it to time you run it. Like I've had it go like some pretty wildly different things based on just weirdness that happened during the measurement process. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Right.
I mean, I would have no problems with any of these speakers being inside of a cabinet, as long as you took the precautions that we normally say, which is make sure it's pushed as far forward as possible so that the front baffle is proud of, or at least in line with, but hopefully a little bit proud of the whatever it is in or around.
The front fascia of the cabinet. Yeah.
And if you can, put some absorptive material behind it and around it while it's in there. You don't want to shove it full, even though you could with this because it's not... doesn't have any rear ports or anything, but I would still leave a little bit of air. There is some heat that goes on with these things, so yeah, nominal, but still, I would always do that. But I would have no problems putting it in here. I don't think I would. I wouldn't be surprised if Odyssey said it's a small or large, and probably large.
Probably large, just if he actually goes with the 90C. Yeah, I mean, I guess we can say, in a very generalized sense, it's probably a little bit easier if you know you're going to be embedding your speakers inside of a cabinet or inside of a bookshelf or something, if they are sealed or front ported, or in this case, front passive radiatored. Any of those designs, it probably is a little bit easier to deal with, but as long as you're willing to put absorptive material, and we want it to be pretty thick, right? We're not talking about just like a little 1-inch lining, but some insulation that fills up the back end of the cabinet or what is behind the speaker in the bookshelf. As long as you do that, having a rear ported speaker really isn't an issue. So it's not that I would exclusively look at sealed centers, or even say if it's ported, it has to be front ported. That isn't necessary. You can look at rear ported center speakers knowing that you're going to put it in a cabinet. Just know that you're going to want to have some nice thick insulation in the back of that cabinet, and that should be fine. Yeah.
So he has one Velodyne subwoofer in the middle of his front wall.
Whoa, we skipped a whole bunch of questions.
I did. I scrolled. I scrolled. Sorry, let me find it.
Only on B.
Okay,
yeah.
What other speakers would we suggest at a similar price point? Again, 6,000 Canadian for the front three. And just so we have it in mind, if they offer a wall-mountable surround model that will ideally match the front three, that could come into play as part of his decision. Mm-hmm. So we have our usual suspects in Europe and Canada, right? So you've got a Pyrion, you've got a Ascend, you've got
both of which you'd be ordering from the States, but they are available.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they're available. SVS would be on there. SVS is going to save you a bunch of money, too.
Yeah. And that's very available in Canada from Canadian resellers.
And then CAF are the ones that pop to my mind. I mean, I would say RBH, but I really don't know about RBH in Canada.
Yeah, that is pretty tough to find. And they've discontinued everything at this point. So they've got Gene over at Audioholics. He's been putting up some things where they've got a new flagship series that they are working on. So it's not as though RBH is gone completely. But as far as all the lineups that were listed on their website, they're all discontinued at this point. So it's kind of difficult to suggest RBH right this second. Hopefully they'll have a good offering that's coming back. But there we go. Tom was saying we haven't been recommending a lot of speakers, but we have been recommending speakers, and here they are, our usual suspects. Not a lot of surprises if you've listened to our other suggestions, but that's because we know these sound good. We know that these speakers are very unlikely to be the problem if you don't like what you're hearing. They
also got Focal, you've got Revel and stuff like that you could listen to.
Yeah, I mean, I would say
I would not limit myself to Paradigm. I'm going to be honest with you. I like Paradigm speakers. I think they're fine. Mm-hmm. But I think you can get a very similar sound for less money from some of these other companies.
Well, I mean, the other question, taking it right back, is he's got Monitor Series 7s, which are good speakers. Yeah. And you've got to go pretty far up the chain of a lot of brands before I would say, oh, yeah, that's something I would say is pretty darn clearly better. Like, this is not a easy upgrade, because you're starting from something that's already pretty darn good. And I don't want you spending $6,000 plus and then going, maybe it's better. Like, you would convince yourself that it is because you just spent $6,000, but like, you want something that's pretty clearly different. And I don't know how far you'd have to go to really get that. I did want to mention in Paradigm Founder series itself, I think he probably just looked up center speakers and found, the only listed center model is that gigantic 90C, but they actually have a 70 LCR, which usually shows up as a pair on websites. But that is one that can be used vertical or horizontal because it has the coaxial design. That is not just a waveguide around the tweeter. That is a driver. It is a tweeter embedded inside of the mid-range driver. So this is one where turning it vertical or horizontal is not going to drastically change the dispersion characteristics with that coaxial driver design. Now that's $2,100 each. So if you got 3 identical of them matching and put one of them horizontal, you're over $6,000, but you're pretty close to the same price point. And what I like here is that it's not such a gigantic center. You don't need the 90C from 9 feet away.
Don't need it. Yeah.
And like, this will will probably fit into whatever plans you might have had for the cabinet for a more normal size center speaker if you want to stick with Paradigm Founder series. I mean, you could easily stick with the 40B bookshelf speakers and then use this 70 LCR as the center instead of going all the way up to the 90C as the center. Save
That's
yourself
funky
a bunch
speaker,
of money.
man.
Which one? The 70 LCR?
The 70, yeah.
Why? It's just a coaxial driver. What's so weird about that?
I know, but the middle driver looks bigger than the
it is.
two side woofers.
It's a 6.5-inch mid-range and then 5.25-inch woofers.
Yeah.
It's a little bit unusual.
Funky looking.
But yeah, I mean, Tom mentioned KEF, and there you go, KEF with not just coaxial but concentric drivers. Very similar design, and you could afford the R series. You're right up there to the R series, and man, oh man, like I don't know, I haven't heard the new Paradigm Founder series. I don't know how great they are, or if they're a little bit disappointing for the price or whatever. I don't know, but I know the KEF R series, and they are really nice speakers. Ones that I would venture to say, I think you would notice an improvement over your Monitor V7s, as good as those are, make no mistake, but I think the KEF R series is a noticeable upgrade. It's right in this price range. So they've got the R2C, which again is a left center right design. You can use this vertical or horizontal. Those are $1,700 each, so they're actually less expensive than the 70 LCR Founders, and that's Canadian prices. You can buy KEF direct. Yeah, and then they also have their R3 bookshelf model from KEF R series. Those are $1,500 each, so that is definitely right in this same price range, and something I would feel quite comfortable recommending. We'll come back to the surround speakers. That's going to be his next question, but some of these do have different surround speaker models. Yeah, we did mention Ascend, the Horizon Center. That's a big center vertically. That's something you'd probably want to customize your cabinet for.
It's big.
Yeah, front ported. This is front ported. I should mention the KEFs. Those are all sealed designs, so no worries there. But yeah, the Horizon RAL front ported design, so that'll work inside the cabinet. But yeah, it's big. It's real big. And then of course you can get the Sierra 2s or the Sierra 2 EX to match. So it's $1,500 US for the Horizon RAL, $800 each for the Sierra 2 EX. So once you do conversion and shipping, you'll be very close to the same price point because it's not super cheap to ship them across the border from Ascend.
Right.
Mentioned SVS, you'd be going for the Ultra series, the Ultra bookshelves, the Ultra Center. So yeah, I mean, I've got no qualms recommending them. How big of an upgrade they'd be over the Monitor V7 series? Ooh, that's a little questionable to me.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
These are...
That's why I said you would save a bunch of money, and I think you would end up at the very end going...
Yeah,
I think they sound about the same.
And make no mistake, they both sound really good. That's we're not saying it's not worth it because they don't sound good. We're just like, you've already got darn good speakers. So
right.
You know, $500 each for the Ultra bookshelf, $700 each for the Ultra Center. So these are less expensive than the other ones. Tom mentioned Aperion. Yeah, the various Grands, they're going to be right up there. And then Martin Logan also. I think those could be worth an audition just because you can go to a Best Buy in Canada and listen to them in the store, or maybe bring a bookshelf pair home, and it's easy to return stuff to Best Buy. So the Motion series is where you'd probably be looking price-wise, because going up to the Electro Motion series is a huge price jump. So, you know, if you're looking at like the 50 XTI Center, those are $1,300 Canadian. So, you know, it's pretty
should be able to
darn
audition KEF in Canada too, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
can audition KEF all over the place here.
Oh, yeah. And you can buy them direct. So, yeah.
I don't know which one of these I just like...
gravitate.
My gut tells me.
Yeah. I mean,
I was looking at those Ascends and thinking that was the direction I'd go, but I like the KEFs.
They're sort of I really like the KEFs. The Ascends are maybe the most different because it's the true ribbon tweeter. You're not getting that in anything else. But the Martin Logan Motion series, that's the folded ribbon tweeter.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for something a little bit different in the tweeter, it's going to be the Martin Logans or the Ascends. Yeah, I mean, I will vouch for that KEF R series all day long. But the thing is, maybe the Paradigm Founder series is every bit as good and maybe even a little bit better. They cost a little bit more. And I would be kind of surprised if Paradigm, just put out a new second from flagship series that sounds like utter garbage. I wouldn't anticipate that by any means. But yeah, those are some alternatives. He asked for alternatives. Those are alternatives. I'd stand by any of those.
Yeah, I think you could just throw a pencil up in the air and whichever it landed on, whatever it made a mark on, if you bought those, you'd be okay. Except for maybe the SVSs. I think the SVSs you'd end up going, I wanted an upgrade and I didn't get an upgrade. I don't think that you would think you got bad speakers. I think
no, definitely not. But it just might be real close to what you already have.
Right. So he doesn't feel an immediate need to change his Paradigm surround 3 bipole speakers, especially if he sticks with Paradigm for the front 3. But if he were to upgrade his surrounds and surround backs, what would be our suggestions for models that would keep up with the Paradigm Founder series or other speakers of that same price, class, and quality? Well, the thing about Paradigm just in general, and Canadian speakers, I guess, Paradigm specifically and Canadian speakers in general, is that NRC Lab just makes it, that doesn't make, but encourages everybody to make very flat speakers. So literally any of these speakers should all be okay with what you're doing, except for maybe the Martin Logans. The Martin Logans would be the one I would be maybe thinking might have a slightly different timbre, but even then, they're surrounds, and I don't think you're going to notice the difference. So, all of these speakers would play nice together.
Yeah, it's a bit interesting because like Paradigm themselves, like within the Founder series for sure, there is no like on-wall model. There's nothing hang on the wall model that's part of the Founder series. They have the surround, but it's the same surround 3 that you already have. I mean, that used to be just part of the the Monitor series, but now it's just its own standalone series is the surround 3, but that wouldn't be any different from what you have already. So what Paradigm is mostly focused on is their like stand mounted and tower speakers, and then in walls. That's sort of what they've done now. That's where they're focusing. So you could look at some of their in-wall ranges because they have the in-wall range that uses the same aluminum magnesium drivers. But whether you want to do in-walls, it doesn't really seem like it. It seems like he wants on-walls. So I am thinking Kef here, because in that R series, they have their R8A. Now, this is a wedge-shaped speaker. And of course, when we get to SVS, there's the prime elevations with that wedge-shaped design. But this can be used. It's got the switch so that you can either use them up firing, where you would put them on top of your speakers and use the Dolby Atmos up firing, Dolby enabled, Atmos enabled design, or you can just mount them on the wall, where they look perfectly reasonable mounted on the wall, but they do have that wedge design. So it would actually make a lot of sense in his setup where he has his mounting points is already elevated. So this will angle them down a little bit. So yeah, that is certainly an option as far as Kef goes. And I'd be surprised if AV's surrounds, those would like not sound good with Paradigm speakers. It would seem unusual to me. Over in Ascend's lineup, of course, there's the Sierra Luna speakers, which is a 6-inch deep and wall-mountable, flush wall-mountable, little compact satellite speaker, but with the RAL ribbon tweeters. So if you're looking for something that'll match up with a Horizon RAL or a Sierra 2 EX up front, then that is certainly an option from them. SVS, as we mentioned, of course, you got the prime elevations that we talk about all the time, but in the Ultra series, these are like the only ones that still have one of those wedge-shaped, looks like a bipolar dipole design. Now, with the SVS Ultra surrounds, you have the option of doing bipole, dipole, or dual monopole. You can set them however you want. Like, it has 2 pairs of binding posts, so you could actually have one connected to the surrounds and one connected to the surround back connections as dual monopoles if you wanted. But if you want to keep the wedge-shaped design and you go with SVS, that's certainly an option there. Let's see. Martin Logan, in the Motion series, they have the Motion FX. So that is an option there. That is another one with the bipole design. So yeah, there's certainly options here for surrounds that match up with any of the things that we've recommended. If you do end up going with the Paradigm Founder series and you want something that's easily wall mountable and, higher end drivers than what you have in your current surround 3s, I think the Kefs are probably a good option.
Yeah, I like those too. Yeah, they have 2 keyhole mounts in the I don't know how the bottom of the wedge, the small L side is where the binding posts are. The keyhole mounts are at the top or right at that edge right there where the longer side. So you just kind of mount them in there, and it should work pretty well. So he has one Velodyne sub in the middle of his front wall, and the new custom cabinet will be built to house that in the same position. He'll be adding a second Velodyne sub in the middle of his back wall. He doesn't have an RCA cable run to that back wall position, but he does have speaker wire already run back there inside the walls. Would it be okay to use speaker wire to an RCA adapter? Boy, I really want to say no. I don't know. I've never even heard of a speaker wire to RCA adapter.
Yeah, they do exist.
I would be worried about interference.
That's sort of the concern. Yeah. Like, It'll
Look at
function.
these things. I've never even seen these things before. They're cute. They look like they're weapons from a Doctor Who episode.
Yeah, so on YouTube we're just showing an image where it's just sort of a push button design. You push in the red and black connections, feed your speaker wire into a couple of terminals, and then it just converts it to an RCA connection. One of those is the shield, one of those is the tip, and it's no mystery as what's going on electrically. Electrically speaking, the signal will go down the speaker wire and it will function. It's a matter of will it pick up any interference. And the thing is, it might not. It depends on what else is going on inside your walls, and we don't necessarily know that in your case.
Right. You run it right next to power. I mean,
Right.
these things can act like antennas too.
Sure.
Speaker wire can act like antennas because it has very little shielding on it.
Yeah.
So,
And this is sending an unamplified signal. This is sending a
Right, a
line
low
level
power.
signal, which because the reason speaker wire doesn't need to be shielded is because it's an amplified signal. The signal going down a speaker wire typically is much, much stronger than any radio frequency or electromagnetic interference that's going to come into the speaker wire. So that's why we don't shield speaker wires. But with line level, it's such a weak signal that, a radio frequency, which is really, really weak in terms of that, but that could be enough to interfere with it. So yeah, it's questionable.
right. Do you have a ham radio neighbor? You
Right.
you could be picking that stuff up too.
Yeah, so it's questionable to me. It's not that, free of interference, there's no reason this doesn't work. The signal is going to get down a speaker wire just fine. It's going to conduct the signal
a vacuum.
just fine. Absolutely. And these little push button adapters, they do the job perfectly fine. But what these are typically used for is an amplified speaker wire signal, and it just happens to be like, especially the Bose speakers that have an RCA plug on them instead of speaker binding posts.
Right.
That's what these are really sort of meant for. Yeah, so to me, it's a little bit
They're
questionable.
not expensive. You could just buy.
They're off of
couple of
Amazon,
them.
so you can return them if they don't work.
Don't work, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be a big issue if that's what you end up doing. There are the wireless subwoofer kits, and we will stand by SVS's tri-band if you want to spend $200 on it. We will also stand by in almost all situation Outlaw Audio's AW4. I definitely like that one, which is $150. So it's not a tremendously cheaper, but it's a bit cheaper.
SVS has a cheaper model too. If you're
They
not,
do. I
this
just
is
don't like the
this is
form
not a
factor
huge
of the
room.
cheap one.
Yeah.
But this is a solvable problem. So you can go wireless. It'll cost more money than these tiny little speaker adapters, that's for sure. But if those do pick up interference, then you can definitely go wireless subwoofer kit and it'll totally work.
Infinite Gary says they come in what? This is just out of nowhere.
It's a weird sentence. I know I structured it strangely.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so they come in different price points, 1,400, 1,600, and 4,500. But if your room isn't huge, say about 15 by 20 feet, how similar or different would the SVS PB3000 Monolith 13 THX or JL Audio Fathom F113V2 subwoofer sound?
One of these things is not like the others, and
right. So the Monolith 13 is more powerful than the PB3000.
it is, yeah, and
I
bigger,
and bigger,
and
right.
heavier.
And I mean, the amp is like twice or three times as powerful in the
over twice,
Monolith.
Yeah, because the PB3000 is an 800 watt RMS, and the Monolith 13, the new one we talked about in the news, 2,000 watts RMS.
2,000,
So I mean, the closer comparison would be an SVS PB4000 for sure. So then you're talking.
So all things being equal, if a subwoofer isn't playing to its maximum limits, and the only thing that you would notice, and this is air quotes, notice is differences in extension. They should sound exactly the same. They should all sound exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we can get into distortion, we can get into group delay, but the thing is, all of these, the SVS subs, the Monolith subs, the JL Audio,
very good subs.
they're all tremendously good as far as distortion and protecting themselves from not being overdriven or bottoming out or going into heavy distortion and group delay. They're all tremendously good on that. So this is a splitting hairs. All of these for 15 feet by 20 feet, if that's an enclosed room, you're not reaching the maximum output levels of any of these. The PB3000, I guess, would come closest to reaching its maximum headroom.
Right.
But, if we're stopping at reference volume, it isn't. If you want to go beyond reference volume, all right, maybe you got to go to the 13 THX from Monolith. I suppose that is a possibility. how the JL Audio Fathom F113 would fit into this lineup. I mean, it's the $4,500 one compared to these ones that are $1,400 and $1,600. It's a sealed design. It's considerably more compact physically than these other two. So it is quite a bit different than the other ones. Physically and price wise. But I guess that's sort of what he's asking. He's like, okay, you take a much more expensive sealed design. How will it compare to these, physically larger but less expensive ported designs in a 15-foot by 20-foot room? And yeah, I'm going to say, I don't think you're going to hear a difference.
No, I don't think you're going to hear a difference either. So, okay. So in general, a ported design, and we've talked about this 1,000 times, but I'll just recap it real quick. They tend to play lower, easier, and then they drop, the performance drops off. Whereas the sealed design, you can even see this in the measurements of the Monolith 13 THX.
Yeah, putting it into sealed mode, yeah.
And it goes into sealed mode, it drops off earlier, it starts to reduce its volume output earlier, but then it does so more gradually. Gradually, that there's a slope there, okay? But in the case of these subs, the JL Audio Fathom, it's meant to play down to 20 hertz or 19 hertz, however long it's supposed to go. And then, yes, it drops off more gradually after that because it's sealed, but you're just not going to hear a difference, man. They're going to be exactly the same. As long in a room like 15 by 20, you're right. The PB3000 is the one that's going to struggle the most or get as close to being struggling as all the rest of these are going to be like...
Right. Why is my volume knob like at 1/4? Why are you putting me in here?
Who bought me?
That's right.
Who has overspent for me? Because I am underperforming in here.
Right.
I'm not even trying. So yeah, and unfortunately that's just kind of the way that subs are. We worry so much about the speakers and how they sound in comparison to each other, and there's very few subwoofers, and they exist, but there's very few subwoofers out there that are meant to do anything other than just play flat. Occasionally you'll get
I think it's because people still have the memories of it's the speaker brand that tried their hand at subwoofers, and when you measure it, it really only plays down to 45 or 40 hertz linearly, and then there it is struggling at 30 hertz, 25 hertz, and it's farting out a whole bunch of distortion and terrible group delay, and they're like, and
I'm thinking about those little $100 subs that you get from Amazon too, right? Those little itty bitty ones, and those ones, they're doing everything they can to get as much noise out of it as possible, no matter how
sheer
linear
SPL,
it may or may not be.
No matter what that SPL might be.
So, but in the case of all these capable subs, I mean, nobody's sitting here trying to convince us that we need, to have a subwoofer that has a hump someplace or a dip someplace.
Right.
That sounds best to everybody.
Or high distortion.
Right. It's just not how things are done. Yeah. So, fortunately. So, yeah, these should all sound exactly the same.
Yeah.
So, we've mentioned how we recommend keeping Odyssey dynamic EQ turned on, but we always say to turn dynamic volume off. Okay. Not only do we say that, those are the defaults.
That's true. Yeah.
When you run Odyssey, it's going to do this for you. It may ask you if you want to keep that, but that it will be the default with dynamic EQ on and dynamic volume off. Pretty much every AV receiver or pre-pro offers some kind of dynamic range compression setting, so it isn't just an Odyssey thing, right? Yes.
Absolutely.
And in fact, I wrote an article about dynamic range compression and what it does and the different names of it. And there's night modes, they call them sometimes, another thing. So Gary asked before about certain movies and shows where the dialogue just seems like it was mixed too low compared to the score and sound effects. What do we think about using dynamic range compression to make it easier to hear that dialogue? I say, knock yourself out.
I'm for
That's
it.
What I say.
I say, give it a try, because that is a setting you can turn on.
I'm pro you pressing buttons, Gary.
Yes, and I mean, often there's low, medium, high, right? So I am absolutely for giving that, because this is 100% non-destructive. There is no, it's not messing with what you did with your room correction or any of your, amplifier configuration or your bass crossovers or anything like that. It's not messing with any of that. This is a setting that you can freely try, and then you can go right back to turning it off, and nothing has been destroyed or changed. So, I mean, for my parents, I put on Odyssey dynamic volume on their speaker setup for their television, and I put it on medium because My mom does not like big swings in volume. My dad is hard of hearing, and it is honestly easier for them all the way around in terms of enjoyment to have some dynamic range compression. And I think that is completely fine for that scenario, and I think it's perfectly fine on certain programs where you're having this issue with the dialogue. It does help sometimes. It absolutely does help sometimes.
Older, poorly mixed movies, or poor
and
transfers,
some of the new ones too, to be fair.
Yeah, let's be honest, right? Victor will be adding a backup generator to his house. It will tie into his electrical panel to provide power in the event of a blackout. He knows for sure he will use it to power things like his fridge and furnace, select lights and outlets, i.e. obviously the important things. But from an environmental and moral point of view, would it be wrong to power his home theater off the backup generator as well? Should he feel bad for enjoying his theater while his neighbors are sitting in the cold and dark, and he'd be burning fuel just to keep his big display and speakers going? Well, I mean, this is how the other half lives, buddy. If you can't lord it over your friends, family, and neighbors, then why are you even buying it? That's what I say.
Well, I mean, there's the question of, could he consider a whole house battery instead of a whole house generator? You got the Tesla power walls and other things like that. Because on an environmental scale, rather than it being, I'm assuming it's like diesel generator he's talking about. He talked about generator
I would assume so, yes.
burning fuel, and that's your typical one is a diesel generator. Now, obviously, a diesel generator, there are more options at lower prices than a whole house battery. The Tesla power walls are not cheap, but if you are looking at it from an environmental standpoint and you want to feel better about it from that point of view, I think the power, and then once you've got like a power wall and you're not having such a large environmental impact as running a diesel generator, then it's up to you. How long do you want the battery to last? And do you feel comfortable running your home theater off of it? Because there's no downside at that point. But if he is sticking with diesel generator, do we think it's right, environmentally, morally, to run your home theater off of that?
There's just so much wrong with the world right now. I don't know that this is really something my son and I were listening. Yeah, I drive him to school right now because he's not taking the bus yet, and we were talking about things that are going on in the world, and I was like, just at some point, there's only so much you can get mad about or care about. You have to at some point just like disconnect and say, okay, I'm sorry. I know there's this suffering going on in the world, this part of the world, and I know it's very important to some people, and it's important to me too. But I don't have that much brain power so that I can do, and this is one of those things where I'd be like, dude, it's like, how often are you doing this? Are you doing this weekly? Are you doing this once every couple of years? Because I don't know that I would feel that bad if it only happened every once in a while.
Yes.
If it's happening all the time, well then, maybe don't.
Right.
But I mean, I look at my parents, right? They have a generator, which is gas powered. And when the power goes out, they turn it on. And mostly what it powers is their refrigerator and my brother's room. My brother is autistic and he cannot handle change in any way, shape, or form. So he has his own AC unit in there, and that room is always like 60 degrees. It's freezing in there. But that's the way he likes it, and that's what he needs. So they will be running a generator during power outages just to make sure that his lifestyle can continue the way it is for everybody's peace of mind and everything else. You would look at that, or maybe you might look at that and say, wow, what a waste. Why are you running, keeping this one room in your house freezing cold when
there's a
you
good
could
reason.
be,
That's why.
he could just suffer a little bit. Well, you don't do suffering very well.
If you were just doing it with nobody in that room, it would seem weird.
Right.
That would seem like a waste to me.
But if you're only doing it every once in a while, I guess I wouldn't feel bad about it. Yeah, but I also probably wouldn't go up there and power that whole thing up just to watch a movie or play video games or because I was bored.
I mean,
if I was in the middle of something, I would finish it and then I would turn everything off.
I think there's a completely legitimate safety case for having a television that's still powered. Because if we're talking about just getting news in that, I think that is important. And yes, if this is a week or 2 week long power outage and you're able to watch some TV and have a little bit of respite, I think that is completely valuable and justifiable, even when it's a diesel generator and not a whole house battery. So to me, the number one answer is, if you can afford a whole house battery, I'd go that way, because I think that clears up everything, and then do what you please. But if this is going to stay as a diesel or gas powered generator, my personal feeling is that I would have a television that can still keep going and I can watch things on that, I probably wouldn't power my entire theater and immersive audio system. I personally probably wouldn't do that.
It seems like the subwoofers would be drawing a lot of power for no real reason.
Maybe.
It just seems a little bit excessive. Like, do you really need it to shake the couch? All right, so he listens to Spotify quite a bit, and he often streams it from his phone to his AV receiver. That functions perfectly fine, but would he get better sound quality if he invested in a dedicated network player?
Nope.
Yeah, I guess you get better quality if you pay for it, though, right? You get better quality if you pay for Spotify versus the free version. Isn't that correct?
I mean, as long as what you're streaming from your phone to your AV receiver is not Bluetooth, if you're doing it via AirPlay, which is lossless, then there's nothing I mean, people will argue about, the AirPlay is limited to 48 kilohertz. It's not 96 or 192. No difference to be had. But yeah, if you're forced to do the streaming over Bluetooth, then I can maybe make, I mean, at least we know objectively that's lossy. Whether you'd actually hear the difference, I think, is still debatable. But objectively, we can say if it's via Bluetooth connection, that is lossy. I don't go for any of the dedicated network music players. I think all of them are a ripoff. I know, I'm going to get flamed for that because there are people who absolutely love theirs. And if you love the interface and the experience, I am completely fine with that. But as far as justifying it from these make everything sound better, I don't buy it. Okay, that's me. But what I can totally get behind is an Amazon Fire TV Cube. Because it's $100. It's $100. It's outside of the Apple TV 4K, and he's not talking about Apple, he's talking about Spotify. The Amazon Fire TV Cube is the best streamer as for music streaming. It's really good quality, comes out of the HDMI port, completely lossless, and for the interface, super easy because you can talk to the voice assistant if you want to, or you can use the remote. It's all there. That I would go for that. If you want something where you're not having to pull out your phone and stream it wirelessly, you just want a device that can be plugged into your AV receiver at all times, $100 for the Amazon Fire TV Cube is what I would suggest.
So streaming devices, streaming boxes, the squeeze box we used to have, sure. We had all these things, and they were trying to position themselves as high-end devices, and there's still some, esoteric companies out there that are trying to put these things out, and, they're compatible with Tidal, and like Tidal's the only one I know that's the really high-quality ones, but there's other services out there that I've never heard of that also do these things, and for the most part, I just don't. I mean, you buy the streaming box because you want all the services in one place so that you can access them easier and have an interface that you're comfortable with. You don't buy it because it's going to make it all sound better.
Right.
I mean, that's just.
But outside of Apple Music, the Fire TV Cube does all of them. It does, well, obviously Amazon Music HD, that's built in there. Does Tidal, does Deezer, does Spotify, does Pandora, it does all of them. Yeah, they're all in there. So outside of Apple Music, that's the only one it doesn't do.
Okay. Ian can't quite recall where he read about it, but he'd like to hear us discuss the differences between display where the light is reflected, like a projector and a screen, versus emitted, like flat panels. He recalls having read a study or an article that asserted that, other than fire, the sun was our only source of light for the vast majority of human evolution, so we are used to seeing reflected light that's come from the sun and then bounced off an object rather than the object itself directly emitting light. So putting aside concerns about black levels and contrast, let's assume ideal light control and an excellent projector and screen size, will a projector plus a screen always look more natural than a direct view flat panel?
What do you think, John?
I just don't think so. I don't think so. I understand what's being said here. I understand the thought process behind it, and maybe the theory. I've never looked at a projector and thought it looked more natural than a flat panel. Now, there's a lot of things about flat panels, especially LCDs, that I have thought. And even like my parents' plasma, which is very good, but they have cable service, so they watch sporting events, and it looks awful because of the compression, right? Not because of the flat panel
display technology.
itself. So there's so many things that are going on when we're comparing a projector to a flat panel. Like, to hold all those things constant and then be able to say at the end, this one looks more natural than that one. I think if you held all those things constant, you were able to get like the same amount of motion smoothing or whatever it was that the image itself was identical coming from each one. I do not think you would be able to reliably statistically tell that one was more natural because it was reflected instead of emitted. I think that people might believe that,
sure,
because it makes sense, but I think those people are wrong.
Yeah, there's a few things on a technical and like biological level that there are some real differences where there have been case studies, particularly on a thing called metamerism. Which is that we do have these three cones in our eyes that are responsible for our color perception. Now, we refer to them as the red, green, and blue cones, but each of them responds to different wavelengths of light to various intensities. So we have these cones that mostly respond to blue light, and then it's like a bell curve, right? So it drops off how much that cone in our eye responds to green and red light, and then we have one that responds mostly to green light, but then also responds to some red and blue, but not quite as much, and then one that's mostly red. And all of these curves sort of overlap, and that's how our brain puts those signals together, along with the rod receptors in our eyes that just receive light, essentially black and white, or it's actually mostly green, but in any case, they put all of that information together, and that tells us the shade that we're looking at and the intensity that we're looking at. So we can sort of think of all of those receptors as photon buckets, and they can become saturated. They can become fully saturated, but it's also like, why can we tell violet apart from blue when most of that is all being received by the same cone? Well, it's because violet light will be a greater number of photons, but that particular cone is not responding as much to their intensity because it's mostly responding to a peak in the blue frequency. So it says, okay, I know these number of photons are coming in, but that cone is not responding very much, and the green and the red cones aren't responding at all. So I know that must actually be a shorter wavelength than blue. That's what our brain does to put all of that together. So when we're looking at a flat panel display, LCD or OLED these days, or plasma back when that was still around, they have more distinct points of red, green, and blue, where those colors are more separated. There's not as much in between. There's not as many yellows and blue greens and stuff that are actually coming from the display. It's more distinct points of red, green, and blue coming from each subpixel. Whereas up until recently, most projectors have used either halogen or xenon lamps. And halogen and xenon, especially xenon, but halogen as well, those lamps are sort of heralded as being closer to the light that comes from the sun, which is the entire range of frequencies. And again, there's actually still some peaks and troughs in specific wavelengths that come from the sun as well, but xenon lamps approximate that really closely, and halogen is sort of second closest as far as widely available lamps. So what the light that is coming out fully from a projector, it's going through filters, it's still creating red, green, and blue subpixels and that, but it has a bit more of the in-between yellows and oranges and blue-greens that technically we don't even really want, but they're kind of like leaking through because the original light source had them, whereas on the flat panels, the original light source doesn't really have them. It has more distinct points. But now we're getting into laser projectors, and laser projectors have even more distinct points of red, green, and blue than our flat panels do. Even quantum dots aren't as narrowly focused points as far as the exact red and green and blue that's coming out of them. So I mentioned metamerism. That is the difference from person to person in our perception of very narrow bandwidth slices of red, green, and blue. Not everyone perceives them exactly the same. Whereas if something is lit with sunlight or lit with a xenon lamp, we tend to all agree on what color we're seeing because it's being illuminated by this broad spectrum of all kinds of wavelengths rather than one very specific wavelength of red, green, and blue. So that has been responsible in some studies for people being able to more easily distinguish between something that was lit with LEDs or lasers versus something that was lit with a halogen or a xenon lamp. But like I say, that's changing now. Our projectors are all going laser, and that issue is going to be common to projectors and flat panels now that projectors are more and more every day becoming laser driven. So on a technical and a biological level, that can be one explanation for what was going on there. The other one, honestly, is projectors are dimmer. There's really no two ways about it. Projectors are dimmer. Yeah. And when that happens, there's a biological response in our eyes to that as well. Projectors have traditionally not gone up to the light level that caused our pupils to constrict. Your pupil could open, it could dilate to a certain level, then it could stay there for the entirety of the movie. It didn't have to constrict at certain points. On flat panels, the range is too large. Our pupils are responding to that. So if you're talking about what is the more relaxing scenario, well, you could do it either way. You just have to turn the light output way down on your flat panel. Turn your backlight setting, all the way down, and it will have that same more relaxing feel as what traditionally projectors were doing. But now we're getting brighter and brighter projectors that are starting to put out enough lumens and reflect enough nits off the screen that they're causing our pupils to respond the same way that flat panels did. So I think it's more those issues. There are the studies where people were able to, without knowing what display they were looking at, tell them apart from those type of things. I think it largely had to do with the lamp illumination and that metamerism issue. So that's my take, Ian.
All right. Karl. First up, Karl just wanted to mention for Chad from last week that he uses a JVC NX7 projector, and even when he uses it in HDR mode, he feels there's absolutely no need for a hush box. That was what Chad was asking about. Yeah. He thought we thought he would need a hush box. It's very quiet, and any fan noise it does make is at a pitch that is not distracting. He definitely agrees with our advice to wait on the new laser model announcements, though. Also inspired by Chad's questions from last week, Karl doesn't use an acoustically transparent screen at home, but he's had lots of experience with them in professional settings. From that experience, he's come to the conclusion that Stewart Filmscreen is pretty much always the safest bet. Did I say that right? Stewart Filmscreen?
Yeah, Stewart Filmscreen. Okay.
And even when they cost more, they're worth it for their level of performance. It seems as though Chad has the budget to afford a Stewart Filmscreen option, but we suggested going with Seymour AV and didn't mention the other alternatives. So Karl is wondering, whether it's Seymour AV or some other brand, do we think any of them outperform Stewart's Filmscreen in every aspect, or was a recommendation mostly to do with budget concerns rather than all-out performance? I thought that, didn't Stewart buy Seymour AV?
No.
Seymour AV, I feel like they are part of somebody else now, or they distribute through somebody else.
I don't know.
Am I wrong about that?
Seymour exists in two companies. There's Seymour AV, which is consumer facing, and Seymour Screen Excellence, which is custom installer facing. Seymour Screen Excellence is only available through custom install. I don't know if they're bought up or partnered up with any other brands.
I thought they had partnered up with somebody, but I might be wrong about that.
I don't know. It's not Stewart if they are. I know that. They kind of take a jab at Stewart on their website at Seymour AV.
Right. I'm going to have to look that up. But, the reason that we recommend Seymour AV is because we have had very good experiences with their products, and the customer service there is kind of beyond compare. He makes sure that your order is right no matter what. He's, great guy, and that's why we recommend him. I've got no problems with Stewart. They just tend to be pricier, I thought, than everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, as far as out and out performance of the screen materials, I would say Stewart Filmscreen, you're getting a very good screen. I'm not going to say anything otherwise to that. But that doesn't mean you can't get very good screens from other brands as well. And objectively, in terms of measuring the color accuracy, the accuracy of the stated gain, all those types of things, Seymour AV and Seymour Screen Excellence, they're the same things. They're just sold under two different brands, one targeted at custom installers, one consumer direct. They are right up there. Objectively, in terms of the measurements, what is being reflected off of those screens, they are right up there with Stewart Filmscreen. One other aspect that came into play with Chad's case in particular is Chad's only going to be sitting 8 or 9 feet away. And when it comes to having a, excuse me, acoustically transparent woven screen where you're not going to see the texture, I'm going to flat out say that Seymour AV's Center Stage UF, or it's also sold as, Enlighter 4K something when it's the Screen Excellence version. That, like, objectively in terms of what's been measured out there and just in personal experience, I think it's the best. Like, I think it's better in that aspect in terms of not being able to see the weave or any sort of texture on the screen from only 8 or 9 feet away. I think it's actually better than anything Stewart offers right now. Stewart has one woven screen material that they recommend sitting 12 feet away from. That's their own recommendation. And then all the rest of their acoustically transparent screens are micro perforations, which are definitely larger and more visible holes when you're that close to the screen. So that was one consideration where I think what Seymour AV is offering in the Center Stage UF is simply the best that is out there for being very close to a woven acoustically transparent screen. Where the big difference is not in the screen materials, it's in the frames. You know, the Stewart frames, they arrive essentially one piece. They shipped in a massive container. That's a huge part of the cost. They are beyond reproach. You know, the quality of the frames that they give you is stellar. There's no question about that. Seymour has a range. They've got ones where, you know, even the long piece across the top and bottom, those are split in two. There's a seam in the middle. There's no seam in Stewart Filmscreen frames. You're never going to find a seam in their frames, whereas Seymour has ones where, you know, they're on their higher end ones, it's a continuous piece along the top and bottom, but they give you the option of a lower priced model that there's a seam in the middle. You join them together yourself. When it comes to motorized masking options, huge delta in price, massive delta in price. You know, the motorized masking that Seymour AV offers, or via Screen Excellence, where it's the same thing, but they have a greater breadth of options from Screen Excellence. They have the full 4-way motorized masking at Screen Excellence. They don't offer that consumer direct through Seymour AV. But you know, when you compare the prices of the fully motorized frames, there's a delta there. But, you know, if you're getting right up on it and examining it closely, which one has slightly more visible seams, which one, if you turn it around and look at the back, can you see the welding seam? You know, it's like, yeah, the Stewart film screens they're beyond reproach. They're right up there, but are you willing to, you know, some of those things that really aren't visible from your viewing distance? So I'm not going to say there's no consideration of cost, but the consideration of cost to me is mostly in the frame. As far as the screen material goes, I will put what Seymour AV is offering right up against what Stewart Filmscreen is offering. Objectively, what comes off the screen, I'll put them right there neck and neck. So I don't think there's any compromise to the performance from what we recommended.
All right. I don't know that we can get through Jay's question.
I mean, if we keep the open-ended stuff very brief, do you want to answer his question first, and then we can just spend
What's
very
the question?
brief...
Which
the last
one is the question?
C is the question. Down below all the pictures.
J. Okay, I'm going scrolling down here. B, C. Okay. Yeah. Jay, we're going to answer your question. We'll do the open-ended stuff some other time.
Okay.
Jay still has a Pioneer Kuro plasma in his main TV in his living room. His wife agreed that it's time for an upgrade, so he's thinking OLED is the way to go, right? Yes.
I would say so.
Unequivocally,
I would say so.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we've talked about the way plasmas rapidly flash a whole bunch of times each frame, while OLED and LCD are sample and hold displays. He's watched Vincent Tio's videos, including his plasma versus OLED comparison. And we've all talked about how motion can still look smoother and more detailed in the plasma than the OLED because of the difference in the way that individual frames are shown to our eyes. Vincent mentioned some methods for increasing OLED motion resolution and for getting the inherent stutter of 24 frames per second content to look smoother. But Jay doesn't remember all of that clearly. So what's the situation? He doesn't want any sort of downgrade from the Kuro. How is Rob dealing with the sample and hold and 24 hertz stutter on his OLED? Should he go for it, or will he end up wishing he'd kept the Kuro?
You will not end up wishing that you'd kept the Kuro. I can pretty much guarantee it, Jay.
Yeah. I can't imagine that you're going to get this OLED and go, oh, just terrible. This looks terrible. I can't imagine a situation where that could happen with an LCD.
Yeah.
Now you'd have to get a cheaper one, but honestly,
even on the expensive ones, when you see blooming, like particularly like subtitles, right? And I'm not talking about someone who watches everything with subtitles on. Like, there's gonna be some movies where they're speaking a foreign language as part of the dialogue, and they put the subtitle. Like, when that comes up and you see the blooming, that even the high end LCDs, you still get some of that. You're like, my Kuro never did that. Right. So there's the OLED is the way to go from here. And then, yes, the sample and hold in particular, when LCDs were really first released, it was, the stuttering and the juddering or whatever you want to call it was bad. The motion was bad, but they've gotten them a lot better with it. And it's not just that. I mean, honestly, the thing that people really saw, particularly with LCDs, and it's still the case, is blur.
Yeah.
There's a difference between blur and sample and hold. Like, they're related to each other because some of the reason there's blur is because LCDs are sample and hold. But it's not just that. If the sample and hold transition from frame to frame is as close to instantaneous as possible, you don't get blur. And that's the way it is with OLED. With OLED, the transition from frame to frame is as close to instantaneous as it can be. And that means you don't get blur on OLED. And that's the thing that would bug you. I have to be completely honest. I mean, I've watched all of Vincent Tio's videos. I absolutely love what the guy does. I see what he's talking about. He points it out, zooms right in on very specific scenes to be like, here is exactly where you can see the difference between a pulse width modulation display like a DLP or a plasma versus a sample and hold display like an OLED. And I'm like, yeah, I can see it. And then I go and watch my OLED and I've never seen it. Like, it doesn't stand out to me. Now, I am not therefore saying that nobody notices it. The 24 frames inherent stutter of film, it just doesn't bug me at all. I don't notice it as an artifact. Now, the thing is, some people, they just don't like the look of 24 frames per second. They prefer it when there is like soap opera effect and you get that extra smoothed out look. That's to them what looks right. And so I can understand that. I can see that. To me, I guess I'm just so used to having watched movies at 24 frames per second since I was a kid that it just doesn't bug me. I don't notice it. I don't see the stutter that's there. I do see judder when 24 frames is converted to 60. Right. I definitely see judder, but I don't see the inherent
stutter. When it's done improperly. Yeah.
I just don't notice it. So to me, I just have it off. I just have the true motion in the LG. That's all their motion stuff. I just have that off. That's how I handle it. And it doesn't bug me at all because there's no blur. I would be bothered by blur, but there's no blur because the transition from frame to frame is as close to instantaneous as you can get. As far as what Vincent Tio was talking about on OLEDs, particularly LG OLEDs, this year's LG OLEDs, so looking at a C1, G1, in terms of increasing the motion resolution, which, honest to God, I mean, I know what you're supposed to see in the test patterns that let you count lines as they're scrolling by at various frame rates and resolutions. I know what you're supposed to be able to see. I can't tell. Like, unless I pixel peep it and slow it down, and like, I can't see it in everyday life. I just don't notice it. But in terms of increasing that motion resolution number, you do have to apply some kind of frame interpolation, the thing we say is responsible for soap opera effect. Now, on this year's C1, G1 LG OLEDs, they have a new mode under True Motion that is called cinematic movement. And on a technical level, cinematic movement is doing frame interpolation. It is creating new frames that weren't there in the original 24 frames per second signal, but it's doing so with the least amount of soap opera effect that anybody has done. And all the people who've been raving about Sony's motion processing, where I always still saw some soap opera effect, I'm like, cinematic movement it's close. It is real close to no soap opera effect. So if it bugs you with it just turned off, absolutely give cinematic movement a try because it's really darn good. The one as far as eliminating the 24 frames per second stutter, that is the black frame insertion. That's what does that. Now, going back a couple of years, you turned on black frame insertion and you would see very noticeable flicker in the image.
Right.
And it was completely unacceptable, and I would never have turned that on under any circumstance. But on this year's C1 and G1, they have different levels of black frame insertion, and level 1, just one click up from off, barely dims it. All black frame insertion, it dims the image a little bit because you're putting black frames in between other frames, and that drops the light output, but it's barely noticeable, and there's no flicker, and it does a really good job. So whether you end up with everything in true motion just turned off, which is still what I do anyway, whether you do that or you have cinematic movement as far as the frame interpolation and one click up on the black frame insertion, like once you do those things, it's plasma good. I'm just going to flat out say it. It's plasma good at that point as far as anything to do with motion. You're not going to see blur either way. There's no chance you're going to regret having moved from the Kuro to the OLED. So, yeah, but I would say for you, since you've asked about these things, go ahead and get one of the new ones. Get a C1 or a G1.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, we'll answer the rest of Jay's questions next week.
Yeah, because they weren't really questions. He sent in a couple of articles and wanted our response to those articles. So
I might have to read said articles in order to have.
that'll keep. That's not a pressing buying decision or something. So yeah, we'll get to those next week, Jay.
All right, we want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Raph for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 131 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raph, for the PayPal donation. Really appreciate that financial support. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Big thanks to our 131 patrons. We'll see if it lasts. Woohoo!
So I want to thank Andrew for giving me permission to use his photos, which I don't know where they are, but I will try to find them, on AV Gadgets, as well as Jason, Shannon, Victor, Ian, and Gurinder for sending us notes of gratitude.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for making that explicit permission for Tom to use your photos on AV Gadgets. Yeah, if you can collect your photos and send them to Tom, that'll be an even bigger help, and we'll thank you again next week for sure. Jason, Shannon, Victor, Ian, Gurinder, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement that you sent to us. It is definitely appreciated, and a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And if you want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.